Welcome to Leadership Reimagined, where game-changing conversations are reshaping the world of work. I'm Janice, the CEO and founder of Ellig Group, Executive Search Advisors, where we are reimagining search. I am particularly delighted to welcome Ron O'Hanley, a leader I describe as a fearless CEO. Ron was the president and CEO of State Street Global Advisors, nearly a $3 trillion asset management company that put its belief in women on display for the world to see in 2017 with the placement of the Fearless Girl statue now on Wall Street. Ron is now chairman and CEO of State Street Corporation. Ron says he has taken these bold stands because, and I quote, empirical studies demonstrate the clear link between more women on boards and in senior leadership with better business outcomes and better long-term value creation for companies. And that effective independent board leadership is foundational to long-term performance. Furthermore, he says, board effectiveness is tied to the diversity of thought that comes from having both men and women on boards. Ron, thank you for taking those bold moves, and thank you for being here today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Janice. I'm delighted to be here.
Ron, I call you fearless because, like the Fearless Girl, you have taken on Wall Street. And when you were CEO of SSGA, you reached out to many companies and said, and I quote, "The first step towards solving a problem is admitting you have one." So you had conversations with many companies about adding women to their boards. What were some of the reactions you received then, and what are you seeing now?
Well, we had a full range of reactions when the campaign was first launched. As you mentioned, we were careful to put our focus on board diversity into the broader context of board quality, effective independent board leadership, and better business outcomes. And I've always said for us at State Street, the focus on environmental, social, and governance issues has always been driven by a value imperative, not a values-driven agenda. I have a personal view about all this, but that's not relevant to an investment decision. What became clear to us is there was a growing body of evidence connecting board diversity to better business outcomes. So as long-term stewards of our clients' assets, we wanted boards to focus on this as a value, not values issues. Still, more than one company told us we had no idea people really cared about this. Many of the companies didn't seem to understand why having diverse perspectives was important to companies and their shareholders. One company even seemed inconvenient, saying, "You want a woman? We'll give you a woman," without understanding the point behind the push for more diversity. At the same time, there were other companies that really embraced the call for more diversity. I recall a real estate firm in Houston, for example, wrote to us and said our input had helped shape their board refreshment process and discussions, and that they added a woman to their board as a result. So that was then. Today, 3 years since we've installed the Fearless Girl statue in New York, more than 580 companies that previously had no women on their boards have either added a female director or are committed to doing so. And today, I think 3 short years later, the environment is very different. Boards no longer ask why they need more diversity, gender or otherwise. They ask for guidance on how to best achieve diversity. And we do see signs that the needle on board diversity is moving, but still slowly. We finally have at least one woman on every S&P board, and the percentage of Russell 3000 boards without a woman has declined to 11% from nearly 25% when we started our campaign. That's great progress, but there's much more to go. And in the meantime, Fearless Girl has taken on a life of her own, symbolizing the hopes and dreams for a future in which gender is no longer a barrier to opportunity.
Ron, do you think that I hear sometimes, I don't think there are enough qualified women. It's a supply issue. And my response is, well, just call me, because in the executive search world, I do see plenty of women. I think it's more of that demand issue. Where do you think we fall out on that in terms of, is it a supply or is it a demand issue?
I'm clearly on the demand side. It's on the demand side. And then I also think a flawed approach to how some companies and boards go about trying to put women or other minorities on boards. It always starts with, well, we want a sitting CEO. Well, almost by definition, then you've just taken the aperture and shut it down to, whatever it is, the 28% of S&P 500 companies that have a woman as a sitting CEO. So I think this is much more about really thinking through what are interesting and deep available sources of talent and how am I going to mine them and how do I open the aperture on where I'm going to source these qualified candidates from.
You have really oftentimes gone against the tide and taken a chance on promoting women, maybe who didn't necessarily tick all the boxes for a role, but still showed promise. What was your thinking behind those actions that you took and even from your own background, your career?
I've been asked this question before, and as I've thought about it, I think it's based on my own experience. I've had the good fortune of people taking chances on me, frankly, taking chances on me that I'm not sure I would take on others. I recall when I was at McKinsey and the then chairman and CEO of Mellon Bank called and asked me to go become the CEO of their institutional asset management business. And this was a 2,500 person organization. The most people I'd ever managed up to that point, were a couple of McKinsey teams, maybe 12 people at a time. And I didn't have the track record. I didn't have the experience. And I said that to him. And he said, listen, I know you've got the potential. I know you've got it in you. If you get it fabulously wrong, you're not going to blow up the bank. So please come.
That's great.
It was a great lesson to me that we often convince ourselves that, we put together these job descriptions that describe truly the unicorn. And, as you would know, Janice, a job description is something that, you want to hold yourself to as you're evaluating candidates, but you often don't find somebody that fills everything there. And you ought to figure out what's really important and understand where and where you cannot take a chance. So for me, I believe that I know people have taken a chance on me. I know others, virtually everybody I know, somebody's taken a chance on them, and it's time for us to do it with others. And I think it's a great way to start to achieve gender parity.
Yeah, and that unicorn really doesn't exist. I often say when I'm looking at candidates, I know she doesn't look like she fits this role or this box, but I know her, she can do it, so you're absolutely right. I understand Helena Morrissey was one of those women you took a chance on when you appointed her CEO of Newton Asset Management, which was a subsidiary of BNY Mellon at the time. So here again, she wasn't the most likely candidate. But you put her in that seat, and she went on to found the 30% Club in the UK. And of course, we know what happened with that. And you approved that as well. So tell us about this whole event of what happened with Helena.
So this goes back to the early 2000s. We at Mellon had acquired Newton in the late 90s, 98, 99, something like that. And as often happens when you make an acquisition, the existing leaders weren't working out. They weren't happy. We weren't happy with them. And in a somewhat surprising move, can't remember now if it's the top 2 or top 3 people left at the same time. We were unprepared for that, but I'd known the firm enough. We'd owned it now for a couple of years. I felt that the most important kind of attribute of the next CEO was proven and demonstrated leadership capability. Helena was running fixed income there, and a very talented fixed income manager and very talented investment leader. But Newton at the time was primarily an equity firm. So, based on what the job description would have looked like, she certainly didn't tick many of the boxes, except for me, the most important one, that she had demonstrated what I thought was extraordinary leadership. And I felt that she had the potential to take this firm from being a firm that was, in transition, being integrated into a larger firm, onto bigger and better things. So it actually had very little to do, if anything, to do with her gender, and everything to do with her intrinsic. And, the rest is history. She was an extraordinary leader, did extraordinary things with that firm, used that as a platform to actually drive other change to the investment industry writ large in the UK. So it's one of those moments that you look back on and you say, there's a few really good things I did in my career, and that's one of them.
You have to be really proud of that. And then the founding of the 30% Club, was that something that she came to you on that as well?
So she did. And she said she had this idea. And as you know, this was well in advance of the idea being talked about broadly. And, at the time it was somewhat controversial because quotas themselves were controversial, but very compelling. And I think, in my view, had a different angle on this platform as an investment leader was compelling because it moved it away from being viewed as a pure social issue and much more about a business issue and a long-term add value to society issue. So for me, that was quite easy. Again, I had no idea it'd be as successful. I knew that it would have some impact, but it's just extraordinarily successful in the end.
Well, you've done many great things in your career, Ron, and so that is certainly one of them. And you had Fearless Girl, and made a significant impact at SSGA during at the helm there. Your plans now as CEO and chairman at State Street Corporation, what lies ahead there?
Well, we have two businesses at State Street. We're a bank in probably name only, in that our two core businesses are asset management and custody and asset services. And the largest business is the latter, the custody and asset servicing business, which is at some level a very old line, sleepy business, but increasingly is at the cutting edge of data. And custody used to be about safekeeping securities, and now everything's in digital and virtual form. So it's really about how do you manage data and how do you, in a very high speed and effective way, make sure that data is available at the beginning of the investment process, works its way through the trade, the portfolio construction, the reporting to the end user investors and back. And that requires a whole different set of skills and way of doing business. We're moving from like I said, something that's based on transaction processing to that plus helping our clients manage their data, helping our clients create. Our clients tend to be large asset managers or large asset owners, such as sovereign wealth funds and pension funds. And it's helping them build investment operations that in turn help them create better investment outcomes. So it's required us to do some M&A. We acquired Charles River Development, the order management and data provider. But we did that back in at the end of 2018. But a lot of it also is around a cultural transformation. And as many have said, strategy is important, but culture eats strategy for breakfast and lunch. For us, it's about recognizing the change that we need to make and how do we move from just being really good at transaction processing to partnering with our clients and helping them create the operations that they need to and helping them, move to this digital format. So a lot of it is about that culture change, which in turn is going to require new leaders with new skills, and for us to be drawing on an increasingly diverse population to fulfill that need for leadership.
You're right, because those asset managers are under huge constraints, aren't they, today? So you really do need to service them differently. It's a whole new, different sales model and how you service them and what you're bringing to them on the technology front and the processing and transactions.
That's right.
Yeah. So no, I get it. So I want to remind our audience that we are listening and having a very insightful conversation with Ron O'Hanley, Chairman and CEO of State Street Corporation, the CEO who landed Fearless Girl on Wall Street. The topics we cover, like today's, are all current, and a new topic with a new game-changer leader is released on the third Thursday of every month. This is a great way to stay current on relevant issues and what's happening around us. So, Ron, thank you so much for giving us these insights. I wanted to turn a little bit to what is happening in our workforce. And I recently heard the Dallas Federal Reserve CEO, Rob Kaplan, speak at the New York Economic Club about the lack of growth in our workforce. And you were just talking about having to hire, new people, new ways of thinking, how you service your clients. And there are many factors that he noted, and you've stated as well, that there's a cost of not having more women participating in our global economy. And research has shown that if women were to participate in the same numbers as men, it would add another 28 trillion or an additional 26% to the GDP annually. What does this disparity mean for economies like the US and Japan that are facing an aging workforce? And how do we all help get more women into the workforce tomorrow and today?
Well, it's a vitally important issue, and you noted why it's so important, because you've got a world that's aging, and it's aging at different rates. At the one extreme, you've got Japan and some European countries. The U.S. Up until recently has actually not aged at the same rate, because relative to many of those other countries, we've had fairly open immigration borders. As immigration in the U.S. has slowed down, we're actually aging quite rapidly. The U.S. had gotten out ahead of the world initially about women's participation in the workforce, and did a very good job starting in the 70s, but is plateaued. And I'll talk about the U.S. first and go to other countries. I think one of the reasons that it's plateaued, it's certainly not been for lack of education. Women now outnumber men in colleges, and I think in the aggregate in higher degree programs. So it's not about education. Mm-hmm. I think it's as much about that we've done some work, but not as much as we could on helping families, particularly women, with childcare, early education, all of which typically get pinned on women in terms of, they need to solve it. And if it can't be solved, then it actually keeps them from the workforce. So in the U.S., I think it's as much, we've got the benefit of education already. We've got to think about how we're going to work on more affordable childcare and things like that enable women to actually have careers and families at the same time. In other parts of the world, they're not as advanced. So, Japan has a healthy amount of women in the workforce, but nowhere near the percentage that the U.S. has had. So similar kinds of things, getting caught up on childcare centers and incentives for women to come back into the workforce. In the developing world, it's another issue. It really is about education. And in many parts of the world, there isn't the education equality that you see in the U.S. So there's a basic education that needs to occur so that girls and women can enter the work, help support their families financially. So it's a comprehensive set of things that need to be done. Developed world, I think it's around childcare and childcare centers and making it affordable. In the developing world, it really is about education, and that to the extent to which we are serious about empowering women, we're serious about economic development, and we've got to get serious about educating all in the developing world, including women.
You've done so much in your own company, and then speaking out for women, talking to companies about putting more women on boards. And you've been an active participant at the Women's Forum of New York Breakfast of Corporate Champions, which, I helped to found in 2011, and I'm going to keep going until we get to parity. But, you were a keynote speaker there in 2017, Ron. You came in 2019 to present the Muriel Siebert Award to Susan Story of American Water. And your calendar was full that day. And I know you rearranged it and you flew down to New York to make it happen. This is you're really passionate about moving the needle for women. Where does this come from? And you keep doing this. So, and I want you to come to the 2021 Breakfast of Corporate Champions. Where does this come from?
Janice, we all have to pick our spots, and I'm sure, like everybody else, picks their spot based on what you think is important and what you think is going to drive long-term value. And I am convinced that if we don't get this right, that we're not going to see the kind of corporate performance that we need, that we're not going to see long-term value creation. For me as an investor, which is where I started my career, it's just very important for me to see this problem get solved. So I appreciate what you and your colleagues did. The Breakfast of Corporate Champions event has truly shined a light on all this. It's made it very clear, not just what the nature of the problem is, but how it might be solved. So I learned as much going there as I hope that I can share with others. So for me, I can't think of a better way to spend time, and I'm honored to be part of it.
Well, we will make sure you know the date well in advance. Congratulations on adding Marie Shandoa to your board. You now have 4 women directors on a board of 12, so you're over 30%. And you also have a robust management committee with over 30% female representation. So that's significant. So you're really, really putting, women in charge at the top. And I guess this is cascading down through the company. So tell us about the plans for, again, a more diverse workforce at State Street and the results that you hope to achieve there.
Well, we begin with the premise that more diversity is going to lead to better outcomes, to better business outcomes, and this has been a journey that State Street's been on for a long time, well before Fearless Girl. What we did conclude several years ago that it was one thing to talk about it, but that we had to hold ourselves accountable. So I and the entire management committee, and starting this year, all of our executive vice presidents, so think of it as the top 110 people in the company, we are held to diversity goals. It's not that every single thing, every job that's filled, that there's a quota around that, but we do have long-term goals. They're 3-year goals that we hold ourselves to, and it's at all levels in the organization, not just the most senior levels. Because again, going back to where do you source these candidates from? Well, if you don't have a pipeline coming up through the middle of your company, then you're going to be left trying to fill the senior ranks from outside. So part of this is being able to develop people, both men and women, from inside the company. So, there's that old saying, what gets measured gets managed. So we measure this. It's tied to people's pay. So not this past year, but last year we finished a 3-year cycle, and some of us achieved our goal and some of us didn't. And that affected pay for that year. So we're focused not just on hiring women, but also developing and retaining them. And we've got a long way to go for people of color. So same kind of thing. In terms of what we're trying to do. Some of the things in addition to hiring is we're very focused on mentorship. And, it's almost like any other thing that any of us are involved with. I mean, we choose where we go to work. We choose, where we, what clubs we join. We choose where we, want to go on holiday, based on, are there people like me there? So mentorship and helping develop people so they can in turn be the people that those coming in can look to is also very important to us. So we're not where we want to be, but we're committed to getting there.
You've made tremendous strides, Ron. So congratulations on that. In closing, do you have any closing words for our audience and to your CEO colleagues in terms of how to enhance their boards and maybe getting to gender parity by 2025?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can easily we can all talk ourselves into that this is an intractable problem and that it can be solved later, but I'm not going to kind of spend any time on it with this particular role. I got to get this role filled. My view is this. Firstly, whether it's for board members or for senior leaders, I remember talking to a person who reminded me that the U.S. Armed Forces is actually quite diverse. And, the U.S. has been in active military engagements now really since the early 2000s. So you've got a whole generation of women and people of color that will have served there 20 years. In most cases, they've had great leadership experiences. They're coming out in, let's say, their mid to late 40s. And in our mind, that's actually a pretty interesting source of leadership. So widen the aperture would be one. Second, I think this idea that your entire board needs to be made up of ex-CEOs is not necessarily true. You absolutely want some either current or former CEOs in your board, but that's not the only skill that's relevant. It's like anything else. You want diversity. So if you hold yourself to that standard, firstly, by definition, you're going to limit the number of women, the number of people of color that are just hold those because they're not holding those positions now. But more importantly, you're creating a non-diverse board that doesn't have good diversity of thinking. Third thing, take a chance. Somebody took a chance on you. You need to take a chance on others. And in most cases, you're actually not going to blow up your firm. Fourth, set targets and measure yourself against them. Get the metrics in place and hold yourself accountable. And lastly, maybe the most important thing is just don't give up. Problem wasn't created overnight. It won't be solved overnight, but it won't be solved unless we keep working at it.
That's great. So we have at least 6 years until 2025, to the end of 2025. We can get there. Thank you. Those are all great points for everybody to look at and follow. And I do think you are going to make that happen and with your colleagues. I understand, Ron, that with all the responsibilities you have, you take some time out to relax by competing in some of the most challenging offshore sailing races in the world, like Sydney to Hobart race. That's pretty dangerous, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I think everybody needs to have their distraction, something that's in the way, and puts them in a spot where they're able to separate themselves and give some separation. For me, offshore sailing has been part of that. It's also focused a lot of my thinking around leadership too, because there's not a more important team than you're ever going to be involved with in a stormy situation offshore. Those 9 or 10 people are actually quite vital. Every one of them is important. None of them are passengers, all of them are crew, and you need to learn how to work together. So it's, for me, it's just a great diversion, yet it's a great life lesson.
That is truly teamwork and leadership working together, isn't it? I mean, your lives are at stake. Yeah. That's amazing. And you must get some great new ideas when you're out there sailing and come back to State Street as chairman and CEO and say, okay, team, let's look at this new idea, right? Ron, thank you so much for joining us today and for being that fearless CEO who continues to promote gender parity and for speaking with great ideas. You are the CEO landed fearless girl on Wall Street, and you are making such a difference to the world. The impact you have made in moving the needle for women is really, I am personally very grateful to you for that and for being a regular speaker at the Women's Forum of New York Breakfast of Corporate Champions. And I will continue to invite you, and I hope you will continue to come.
Thank you, Janice. Thank you for having me here today. And I'm looking forward to the next breakfast.
And thank you to our audience for tuning in to this conversation with Ron O'Hanley, CEO and Chairman of State Street Corporation. You can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, or visit our website at elligroup.com. Stay tuned for more exciting episodes of Leadership Reimagined, game-changing conversations.